Mr. Pop.
Now here's something we hope you'll really like.
It's Rusty's Good Time Oldies. Let's go to the request line, and we're going to go all the way to Yarmouth, Nova Scotia to talk to Quinn. Hey, Quinn, what's going on?
Oh, things are good. We're heading into spring, looking forward to summer.
Oh, I understand it's a little dry up there.
Yeah, it's a little dry and a little cool still yet. Still have to run the heat.
Now, what do you want to hear?
I'd love to hear Crimson and Clover by Tommy James and the Shondells.
As a follow-up to our episode on CJLS Radio's 90th anniversary, we wanted to chat with some other personalities. These folks had a part in the success of CJLS as our radio station. Whether it's under Rusty's Good Time Oldies or one of his other on-air personas, Russ LeBlanc is one of the old-school personalities that fans of CJLS of old will remember. He was part of the Slam Dunks basketball team and crafted some of the most memorable campaigns like Lost in the Woods with Gary Nickerson and Bruce Rainey, and borrowed the Coke Castle fundraiser. At home and on the air with Blaster Radio, one of the many internet-based radio stations, we wanted to reach out to Russ and get his CJLS story.
I made the decision at 13, where I'm originally from Boston, but my family's from the Yarmouth area, Edward River. We moved to Yarmouth in '69, and when I went back to Boston for a visit at my friends, I was 13, and I made the decision I was going to be a broadcaster. And it carried me through. I mean, I was playing music over the high school PA. I mean, I was driving Miss Walker crazy because it was too loud. And yeah, it's always been there.
People say, well, we don't get into broadcasting for the money. So what drew you in?
I don't know. The performance aspect of it. I love music. I later discovered at the age of 50 that I had ADHD, and a lot of people said, "Ooh, what's that?" It's bouncing off the walls. Well, yeah, it's a lot of people with ADHD have the comedic sense and creativity, and I guess broadcasting kind of fit that bill. And ironically, when I was going to high school in Yarmouth, Mr. Crabb was the counselor that you talk to as far as getting into a postgraduate type scenario. And I was asking, okay, where can I go to learn to be a broadcaster? And he said, I've never had anybody ask me that question. And he couldn't find too much. There was a school in Halifax, but I make a long story longer. Okay. Well, I was working for the Bank of Nova Scotia just all of 15 minutes. I was in the Yarmouth branch, and I got transferred to Antigonish. And then I finally figured, no, my love was in broadcasting, so I worked part-time at CJFX. And all of a sudden, my brother, who was visiting my parents in Yarmouth, said, CJLS is just advertising that you want to get into broadcasting. I said, what? So I did up a tape, sent it off, and I guess Chris and Jerry were the judges, and that's how I landed my first broadcast gig, and it was at CJLS at the old station. And that was in 1979.
Wow. And I mean, you've done a little bit of everything when it came to CJLS as well, right?
You had to, but yeah. I mean, my second go around especially, but this, the first time I was learning, Chris, it was kind of funny what happened. I was doing the evening shift, which the new kid on the block would do, and I had no experience per se, a professional experience. And Bill Wynn, who was doing mid-mornings, he did something really silly, really stupid. He was doing the Burger House CW Top 15, which aired on Friday nights, and he did it in a country-style Southern accent, more or less goofing on everything. He got fired, and within 10 days, I got the mid-morning slot. I mean, Mr. Green. And Ray Zink said he's never seen anyone go up the ladder that fast. I mean, it was nothing as far as my talent was concerned. I was just the right person at the right time.
But it seems that is a bit of a theme in some of the quote unquote old school radio stations, in that, right place, right time, you sound okay, or you sound really good, and we're just going to put you on the air. A lot of the folks didn't have formal schooling.
No, not for broadcasting. The funny thing is, when I first started at CJLS, the broadcast school, I got accepted, and I said, well, I'm already working, so I don't need you. So I learned, you learned as you went. You learned on the job, like any job back when, you didn't know how to do a commercial right. Well, you learned. And that's when I went back to CJLS back in the late 80s, early 90s to kind of run things. That was my objective, is to make sure that anyone who came out of there learned as much as they could, if not even more, even, some of the larger stations, because I didn't have that. I learned a lot. But when I was sent out to Fredericton, I got the job. First it was evenings. I was happy. And then they said, "You're the afternoon guy." I was happy. And then they said, "No, you're the morning guy." I was happy and a little astonished. I learned how quickly I didn't know a lot of things. So I vowed never, not no slight against Chris or Jerry or anybody, but there were a lot of things I had to learn over again. And I guess I was very fortunate to have one of the top PDs in the country, Gary Obie, who later was PD for Q107, the Bear in Ottawa. He and I went through some marathon sessions, and I came out of there a better broadcaster. I went to CHNS, and I was lucky. But yeah, back then, you're breathing, you can talk, you're on. But to get to the mid-morning show, I was the right guy. It doesn't usually happen that fast.
One of the things that resonates with me as the average listener, I guess you could call me an average listener, is that when I tune into radio, especially in this day and age with the internet, Spotify, and all the other options that might be available to me, I want to hear people that I know. And certainly back in those early days, I say early days of radio. I mean, the '80s isn't really early, but it is 40 years back. That was a big key, wasn't it, to have people on the radio that you knew and were people that you could recognize in the community.
Well, it's quite easy when you're in a smaller market. And the fact that I grew up there as a teen and things of that nature, that people were listening to me who knew me, that really helped. But the big thing I found, even if you're doing small market radio, and there are some small markets that are independently owned, surprise, surprise, but there are a few, is to know your area. So if you grew up in that area, you're already ahead of the game because you know that area. You're not mispronouncing names. You're not considered to be an outsider. Some people who aren't from the area that go to a smaller market, say like a Bruce Rainey, he adapted quite well. But he and I became friends. I was his boss, but we became friends. Um, and I probably offered him more information as far as the overall scene and got him involved in a lot of things than I normally would have. And the funny thing is, I mentioned about ADHD, and sometimes when you're hyper focused with ADHD, you're hyper focused. And I remember Ray, who was a good friend of mine, especially back in the mid 80s. He told me, he said, "Boy, you're going 100 miles an hour, and some of the guys can't keep up with you." And it's frustrating for them. So I didn't know I had ADHD back then. But Bruce was one of the people who could keep up with me, or I come up with crazy scenarios as far as promotions, and I felt okay to have him as part of it. So yeah, it's if you know the area, that's half the battle. There's nothing more frustrating than having someone come on the air and you're hearing them pronounce an area that's quite common, and mispronouncing it and tearing it up. You're thinking, who is this person? But if you're from there, you're ahead of the game.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up a good point as well as on some of the crazy quote unquote promotions. Certainly, I remember Bruce not backing down from any challenge, like the Coke Castle, getting lost in the woods.
Yep. Well, I borrowed the Coke Castle from C100, but Lost in the Woods was an original idea, and that was one of the craziest, but one of the more successful. And if I may, I'll just tell you how it came about.
Oh no, I want to hear it.
Okay, I was attending a management course. There was a company that came to Yarmouth, and they were offering advanced management, whatever. And Grant said, "Well, do you want to go?" And I said, "Sure." So there were people from the area, and one person was from representing the ground search and rescue. That's where, I don't know if that was his full-time job. I can't remember. But it was that class, we were to come up with a problem from one of the students, and then we kind of brainstorm on how to fix it. So he had this person, he just came out and said, we're not getting enough public relations. And as far as the class was concerned, the answer really wasn't there at the end of the session. And I just had this light bulb. As soon as he said his problem, I said, I think we can help this person and it's going to be a lot of fun. So I just came up with it. Then I said, okay, Eureka, here's your solution. Do you think you want to go with it? We're going to stick a couple of our people in the woods and you've got to find them and we're going to do it. I'm such a mean boss that we're going to put our morning man out there, and I'm such a mean boss that he got wind. I got wind that he was lost, but that wasn't a good enough excuse. He still had to be on the air. So that was the premise. But the real drive was to give them more public relations, more PR, and it did.
And in chatting with Bruce and having him kind of tell the story from his end, you weren't lost in the woods with him, were you?
No, I went out with the guy that he told you about, and found the location. What I was kind of like, I was there, but at base camp, and I was sleeping in my truck. And the first night, we were going to start the next day, so I didn't have to be there the first night. We didn't send out the alert. So the premise is that these guys are lost. You got to go find them. And so I was there with them when they set up camp, got it all set up, and we got generators. Too bad we didn't have those battery things that they have out now that you can, it lasts a whole day. But we had a generator. And so we got them all set up. And then I went home, and then darkness fell. And an hour or two later, I'm getting this phone call because we had a cell phone out there. That's how they were doing it. The cell phone looked like a shoebox. And I think it was Bruce. He says, we don't know what's going on. We're hearing strange noises. Can you hear this? I think it was a deer or something, right? And they were scared out of their minds. And I said, oh, man, I'm at home. I don't know what I can do about it. You're just going to have to deal with it. They were petrified. And I hung up the phone and said, this is going to be very interesting. So it was nothing much to speak of, but they weren't used to it. And they called in a panic like I was going to run out there. I couldn't find my way out there without the guide anyway, but what was I going to do? But they did it. And the funny thing was, I think Bruce told you about this, is that as we were going, and the deal is that they weren't allowed to look for them when the show was on because we had the generator and we had to fire it up and it was making noise. And then all of a sudden, as we got into this, they had a real crisis and they had to go find somebody and we're on hold. And I was thinking, what are we going to do? And what we did is that I had the announcers go out and do their shows at the base camp. So the whole day was somewhat in the woods, but, they weren't lost. And they weren't roughing it. I mean, they might tell you that, but no, we got the best steaks for them, and I got all new things from Canadian Tire. The thing is that you had to guess as a listener, what day and time are they going to be found? And then if you guess correctly, you get all like new camping gear. And that was the whole thing. Nice. So it was a tie-in. Everything I did, I tried to tie into sales because I was also the sales manager, which is kind of unique. This is when I went back the second time. I was termed the assistant general manager. Usually in a radio station, sales and programming sometimes don't think the same way. Sales wants programming to do a promotion, and programming saying, that's a lousy promotion. We can't do this. So there's a lot of bickering. All I had to do was talk to myself. So just as long as it had a sales element into it. But it was a lot of fun. And the funny thing was, they found them. So we're wrapping things up. And I think we were in South Ohio, and it was Bruce and Guy, one of the engineers, and myself. We were in my truck, and then I stopped at a gas station in South Ohio, and the guy didn't say anything as far as hi. All he said was, so they found you. I said, yeah, they found him.
At least so somebody's working, listening. That's right. People were
listening.
Listening.
We're doing some crazy stuff. And then the international summer, and oh, brother. There was a lot. But even back in the earlier days, Chris and I, when I was there the first time, we did coverage of the Prince of Wales and Princess Di visiting Shelburne. And we took our van, the CJLS van. There was Chris, myself, we were the anchors. Brian Medell was one of the reporters in the scene, and so was Ray, who of course was the news director. And we were in this CJLS van. And to be truthful, the van was parked far enough away that we couldn't see a damn thing. I mean, the crowd was crazy.
Oh,
So
it was. It was
yeah,
not.
we
It
were
was
doing
nuts.
our observations by watching a TV we had in the van. We were just watching TV. And then these kids started jumping on the van. And Chris would say, "Cut your mic," and we cut your mic. And then he'd take his fist and he'd bang the roof. "Get the hell off of this van!" And then we put our mics back on. And, that was something. I mean, I saw their heads. That was about it. But here we were going into great detail of what we were viewing. Yeah, we were viewing the TV coverage, and God forbid there comes a commercial. Yeah, so we got to ad lib our way around this.
Now, certainly, radio of today looks nothing like the radio of yesteryear. I mean, you were still spinning vinyl, I would imagine, back in the
Yeah, I
80s.
was doing 40. It was all 45s. Yeah, 79, 83. Yeah, it was all 45s.
I mean, your
And
commercials were on cart, but
yeah, yeah.
the rest of it was all vinyl.
And a lot of people who know me say, "Oh yeah, you're an extrovert," but I'm also very shy because I went there when I was in high school, and I was asking about getting involved in the broadcasting course. So Chris took time with me, and I went in there. I don't know, maybe 5, 6 times. I was reading newscasts, and Ray would critique me and all that. I'm just a young kid, and I remember listening to these people as a kid, and eventually got to work with them and befriended them. Ray is the godfather of our youngest daughter, so yeah, we're pretty close. Once I came to Ontario, kind of, the separation happens. But yes, and it was kind of funny. And when I say kind of funny, I immediately think somebody who's sometimes misunderstood is Wayne Norman. He was unique, extremely unique. A lot of people knew him as the morning man, for so many years. He had his quirks, and boy, I want to tell you that they were interesting. He was, to me, he was a brilliant man as far as talking politics or sports, especially his Cubbies. He would take his vacation and go to Chicago and watch Cubs games. But when it came to anything technical, now I don't know if he was brilliant to the point of, "Hey, I'll get somebody else to do it," but he pled ignorance. And of course, back then we had the teletype that went constantly with all the news from broadcast news. It would type, 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 type. And you had to change it was just big rolls of paper, newsprint more or less. And you had to change it because they would run out. Well, he'd been working there for years and years. He couldn't figure out how to change the uh, the paper or even on a typewriter how to change a ribbon. And it could have been an act. I don't think it was, because someone had to go to his place and teach him how to use a microwave. And I remember once it was at the new location at Center Town Square, and it was a day of lightning. So at the time, I was doing mid morning, so I would follow him. So I walked into the studio, and flashes of lightning here and there. He was wearing rubber overshoes and winter gloves, just in case it got hit, he would be grounded. I don't know if that works.
I'm not sure about that either. He didn't
I don't
drive.
know.
He didn't drive
He did
either.
not drive. He walked. He walked. He was a fast walker. But hey, if you lived in town, you saw him, especially when he got hooked on something like going to the Y and playing racquetball. Racquetball was a big thing to him. I mean, he would go there, and I played. He beat me. I was good at badminton, but and that's how I first met Chris and Ray and Frida and Louise, was at the badminton club in Yarmouth at the old vocational school, which is not called that now. But yeah, he was unique, and he was there. He was the long term guy. I mean, I believe he was from Ottawa originally, and then they moved. I think he was a military brat. But yeah, and then when I got into the management side, making decisions, and he'd come in my office a lot, and we'd talk, and I had to make some changes, or I felt that we must make some programming changes to update us and stuff. So it let him out, took him off the air, and we were thinking, and Grant and I was saying, what are we going to do with Wayne? So Grant had an idea. We're going to give him what about a talk show? Would that work? I said, yeah, that'd be kind of cool. He's smart. So he was the host of a show called Let's Talk. And he would get guests from, I was hoping, the local area, but he'd come up with guests and he'd run them by me. But all of a sudden, there were guests from out of town, and I'm talking way out of town. I'm talking California, I'm talking New York. He would watch some of the shows like Donahue or Geraldo was his favorite.
Oh, Geraldo,
He would
yes.
he would get the guest that was on that show to be the guest on his show. And it was like, so finally I had to come to him and say, this is all cool and everything, but our phone bills go crazy. You got to talk to some more local people. We can't afford this. But yeah, if there was somebody on Geraldo and it was the least bit interesting, I could bet dollars to donuts he was going to get him on the air at CJLS for the tri-counties. But yeah, I really liked him. He was fun, unique, and we had I guess Wayne Leslie came up with this, or maybe Wayne and Gary Nickerson about. Yes, right. That was Wayne's little thing. So every once in a while, we'd go in the newsroom and do that. And even if he was there, it was like, yeah, it was different. But talk about long-term people, he was it. And when he passed away, it was a sad day. I was living up here, but yeah, good old Wayne.
What other memories come to mind for you? Looking at the evolution of radio over time, what would have been something that would have happened, during your late '80s, early '90s that would never fly today?
Well, if we want to go even farther back, when I was talking to Ray and Ray had about this job, about this new job, management job, he said, Ray got offered the job. He didn't want it. And essentially, you'd be overseeing you'd be a second in command, more or less. But the way that Grant structured it, yeah, you were involved in everything. I mean, decisions. And my job when I went back there is to bring it somewhat up to date because it was lacking. I didn't want people to leave there with what I learned, which was really old school, and bring it up to date. So we had catchphrases. One of the things was we got to get this on 24 hours a day. This, signing off at midnight is not going anywhere fast. And that was always in the back of my mind. And I went to every year I would go, this was my first time doing this, to an AAB convention, which is Atlantic Association of Broadcasters, which I believe Chris was president near the end there. I would go there and meet people from other stations of management, and we'd have guest speakers and people trying to sell us and all that good stuff. So I flew out to Charlottetown, and I realized I should have brought my wife. It was more social too. So from there on in, my wife would come to me. But I was alone in Charlottetown at this convention, and this presentation by Telemedia interested me about going all night with them. They would provide you with the disc jockey, well, the talent from Toronto, but it would seem like they were talent from CJLS. Now these were talented people. I'm sure people were saying, "How come you're putting your best people on overnight?" But no one had done this in the Maritimes yet, and I thought this is the solution. So I just did a rough meeting with them. There was always a function on Saturday night, big all you can drink and eat and all that stuff. And I was just kind of casually talking with him because I ran about it. I said, Grant, I found the answer. I phoned, back to Yarmouth, and then get the best deal is what he was saying. So I loosely negotiated something at 2 o'clock in the morning after all the parties were done. And we were the first ones in the Maritimes to have this service. And Sunday morning, I was to go to I was a member of the Group One Atlantic, which was like a co-op for advertising, and CGLS was one of them. And I eventually became the president of that. But I had to go to that. And just before that, I signed the deal with Telemedia, and CGLS went from, signing off at midnight to 24 hours a day. And I thought that was a really big thing. And as ironic as it seems, that service had been sold twice. One Telemedia, it went to Rogers Communications, then it went to Palmerex Broadcasting. Lo and behold, years later, I would be one of the people who was on that and providing the service to stations 24 hours a day and in the It wasn't just an adult listening, which is what we had. It was middle of the road type thing. I was on Good Time Oldies. We had three different formats, but I was working that same service that I was so excited about signing up for CJLS, and I was back on the air at CJLS, in the late '90s, early 2000s. So yeah, that was one of my biggest that it jumped from the 1960s to that time. Now, to answer your question, um, someone who was familiar with doing a show at that time with all the carts and stuff, if you were just to throw them into a studio now, they would have no clue. They would have the essence of what's supposed to be played, but they wouldn't know how to play it because it's all computer generated. I mean, you look at a studio now, it's pretty bare bones and clean, and you don't have all the carts all over the place and the music, it's all on hard drive. And if someone isn't used to that, they're not going to make it. They're like, where do I go for my carts, my commercials? Well, we had to time out with our head. Look at the clock. Is this going to is it going to time out at 12 noon when it's news? It's all done automatically now by way of computer. So that would be the big difference. Is just the technical. I would think that it would be a little more boring too, because when you were doing everything, you were busy. Now, when I went to do mornings, it was extremely busy on an FM format. Back then, they had different things required by the CRTC and enrichment breaks. I didn't have as many because I was doing the mornings, but you would have to talk about something that you did the other night, or maybe an artist. And I had to queue up LPs, and it was a mess. I mean, talk about disaster. But it was, I was just floundering, but eventually I caught on. But anybody who worked that type of scene would be lost now.
But do you think that foundational part, I akin it back to like when my son came home from school and he was doing math homework and he had a calculator in grade 3, and I'm going, no, I'm going to show you how to do fractions and decimals and whatever the long way, so that you can appreciate what your calculator is actually doing for you. So, yeah, I mean, when you look back at the foundational items that you went through and all of that trial by fire stuff, did that set you up better
Oh yeah,
for the
sure.
future?
And when I went back to CJLS, I was in that train of thought. Now, maybe I was a little too intense for people who are in this type of market, but I thought just because we're in a smaller market, Ray proved that point with the news. That doesn't mean that we have to sound small, that we can implement some things. Now, you're limited as far as your talent pool because it is a smaller market, and either people are starting out or they're ending their career or they just want to be here and that's it. Whereas in a larger market, it's different. Now, these days, well, as you know, I mean, corporations are buying up everything and they're viewing programming in the boardroom, but the basics are still the same. Just because you're airing your commercials a certain way and playing your music a certain way, the elements are the same as far as you say, be local, how to connect with an audience. That hasn't changed. However, the people in the boardroom have, in their wise wisdom, felt that they were going to make it change because they wanted to go with economics. So now you're hearing the same voice, as was the case in Yarmouth. You're hearing the same voice doing one shift, and then you go to Bridgewater and you hear that same voice doing another shift. Or you might hear the same constantly. I hear, because I do an online, I do uh, an alternative country, or uh, a show that's featuring the grassroots stuff and the outlaw country. I do it for one station up here, but I also do an online oldie show, which is heard. I get listeners all around the world. It's great. But I also have listeners from Yarmouth, and they tell me that it's very frustrating that, say, if you live in Pubnico, that you're listening to CJLS and you don't like the song, so you turn into CKBW and the same song's playing. That wouldn't have been done back then. I mean, back in the day. I implemented computerization for our music, but it was just, here's the name of the song, you got to find it. But we were just a lone station. Now that you have conglomerates, and you've got multi stations under their umbrella, one, you're hearing voice tracking, and a lot of the time, the person doing the voice tracking has never been in that market. And also is that you're hearing the same music, that if you happen to be in an area that you can pick up two stations owned by the same company. That wouldn't have been done years ago. But as I say, the basics are still the same, but it's harder to do. I mean, if you're voice tracking in Yarmouth and you're voice tracking for Truro, unless you've lived in Truro, you got to go online. I guess it's easier online. You can find different points of interest and stuff, but you're not in that market. And I think that's what really makes it. That's what made the news department at CJLS. They were very fortunate to have Ray because Ray was national caliber. He just chose to be there. Louise was a local girl and they fell in love. And that's, that's rare as far as a person of that caliber willing to stay. And you don't usually find that. And he had the wherewithal not to let that compromise him, not the fact that he was at one and a half at times, sometimes one a band as far as the news department. He was working with, talk about archaic equipment, not the equipment of the day. It was the equipment of the 1950s, that little Ampex that he would splice the tapes with, and in turn create award-winning content. And I remember the time when he and I went out to the Canadian Association of Broadcasters convention in Winnipeg because the coverage of the Seek landing was nominated, and we were hoping to come away with a gold ribbon award, and thank goodness we did. But we were up against people who had the latest technology, and here Ray had limited resources, and he was able to crank out content that beat them and was very sound and could have aired anywhere. So yeah, I mean, we weren't dealing with the technology of the day. We were dealing with technology of the 60s. And still, now when I went there, I was able to make purchases and we updated things and we got away from vinyl. We're playing all CDs eventually, and then got new tape decks and got new equipment and all that good stuff. But yeah, there was a time when we weren't up to date. But still, like a guy like Gray, he was cranking out top-notch talent or content.
And he didn't let that go to his head either.
No,
He was
very
well grounded.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And Ray had the ability to talk to anybody and make anybody feel comfortable. It's one thing to know that if you're a knowledgeable person, you speak to somebody who isn't quite that knowledgeable, it's easy to talk down to them. But I never saw that in Ray. He was always asking questions and respected whoever he was talking with. So, that's unique. And I don't think, it's kind of like, well, having a Bobby Orr on your team or a Wayne Gretzky, it comes, lightning comes in a bottle but once sometimes. I doubt very much you'll see him, a person like him. Well, you won't in Yarmouth. It's just not structured that way. But you're very fortunate to have that type of caliber and to pass it along to, say, Gary, who started out on air. And I remember when I first met him, I was visiting Yarmouth after maybe I was in Fredericton or Halifax, and I went into his parents at Nickerson Hardware, and I saw Gary, and I commented on, I heard him on air, and I liked it. And he was doing, I believe, mornings, I think, at that time, and then he went to news. But to pass it along to him was great. It was a great resource. And I don't know, was Gary able to pass it on? Yeah, but you got to have that element of talent within you. I'm not saying anybody at Yarmouth at the news department doesn't have talent. Don't get me that way, but very unique, special talent. And Ray had it. Gary, from what I see, he evolved into that. He was working news when I went back the second time. And yeah, it's very, very unlikely that a small market, will get someone of Ray's talent who's willing to stay there and have this for your news person at that station or news director. It's very unique, and you won't see that, especially because even the pay's always been lousy in broadcasting, especially starting out. Now, when I went to Toronto, and I ended up working even part-time at a talk station, I was getting paid an hour more than I ever dreamed of. When I was starting at CJLS, I was probably getting more an hour than I got in a week. And they were apologizing to me. And I'm saying, no need to apologize. I'll accept this. But in the back of my mind, I'm saying, this is great. This is, I'm used to working with two figures and not three, and an hour. And this was back 20 some odd years ago. So yeah, broadcasting, you always start at the low, but Ray was there for so many years. He would have anywhere else, he would have gotten a very big paycheck, but his paycheck was okay. We had little perks too. You mentioned about being, local and people seeing you. Yeah, we were kind of stars, especially my first go around there. We used to get into the Odeon for free because the agreement was with George Dewey, who was the manager then. If we liked, if we liked the picture, we would talk about it on air. If we didn't like it, we said nothing. And then the Yarmouth Twins opened up at the Yarmouth Mall. So Yarmouth had 3 movie theaters, and we could go into the Yarmouth Twins for free. So my wife and I would go, we'd start off at the Odeon, and then we'd see that show, and then drive up to the Yarmouth Twins and see another show. It was a double header. So you had a little perks. But yeah, the job as far as what the pay was like, it's one thing to start out in radio, but to start out in a small market, yeah, it's pretty lean. But getting back to your original question, yeah, you won't see the likes of Ray. That just won't happen. And you might say, well, how do you learn? Therein lies the problem. A lot of people used to learn like I did, well, for a week on the evening show. Well, a lot of the evening shows now are voice tracked.
That's right.
So where do you go? You've got to get a post-secondary degree in order to get some experience.
But
So,
in
or
getting
you,
in getting just to interrupt you, I'm sorry, but to get a degree, you're under somebody's tutelage to get there. But does that put you into a position where everybody coming out sounds the same?
well, I said postgraduate. No, it's a university degree or a college degree. Um, well, these days you see it. You see people coming out with their own so-called opinions, and all they're doing is echoing their professors. Whether their professor is right or wrong is of little consequence. I mean, you come out learning what they know or what they want to teach
Sure.
you and want you to think. Whereas, the free thinking is being lost these days. Now, to your question, well, I would just look at it this way. In radio, it's a little different because what you want to do if you're thinking about getting into broadcasting is that, okay, you're going to school, you want to learn as far as the mechanics. How does this work, that work, what do I do, and all this stuff. How you think, it's not really pitched. You're not indoctrinated to any line, a train of thought in a broadcasting career, none that I've seen. You're taught how to think as far as how to think to get your opinion, but I don't think there's opinions yet. I mean, that would be very scary that if, you have people who are training the next broadcaster and you're indoctrinating a certain line of thought that's controversial or has nothing to do with broadcasting, that's scary. I don't think it's gone that far from what I've seen yet.
In this day and age, of course, with the internet being what it is, what do you see the evolution of traditional radio being?
As I mentioned, you're going to see an individual doing more than just what they do locally. You're going to see them, as they say, voice tracking and doing multiple things. That's been the way in news. I mean, there's been newscasters on the national scene that one minute they're doing the local news for Winnipeg, and then the next minute, they're doing the local news for Toronto, but they're always based in Calgary or something. You're going to be doing lots of things for lots of markets. And that will it water things down? I don't know. Will the cream of the crop rise? I don't know because you're run by boardroom people. Maybe you're not taking advantage, or maybe you don't want to pay what top-notch talent is worth. I don't. But then again, if as far as top-notch talent is worth, if you water it down, then the worth aspect gets lowered. It's a challenging time to get into broadcasting. I always felt that the not so much these days as much, but as far as the Wild West was concerned, it's the internet. I mean, I started getting involved in podcasting, I don't know, a dozen years ago when it was just starting. That to me is where the action is. You got YouTube that is unfettered, that's good or bad, but you have people who have never taken a broadcast course in their life, and you've got people following them as entertainment. And I think that's where it's headed. As far as local, if you're not local with your news and information, which is probably likely these days, not to say that your radio will disappear, it'll always be there. But yeah, if you want to do something and get into it, you're into the internet-based types, because it's still the Wild West, as far as YouTube. Those who are interested will come to the top of the bottle, the cream goes to the top. I think that's where it's at.
In that mind, people are they're looking for that 15 seconds of fame. Does that water down the news of the day? I mean, does that take away from the traditional journalism aspect that's been inherent with radio news?
Well, it could be. I mean, you see things that are flash in the pans. You see people who are doing podcasting back.
Everybody's got a phone. Anytime
Yeah, they
something
do.
goes on,
Anybody can
they
be a
got their phone
podcast.
up, right?
But if you look back 10 years, there aren't a lot of people are still doing it now. Only the good ones. Uh, and so either an individual will get bored because no one's watching them or listening to them. So I think the public will decide whether or not they're here for 10, 15 minutes or for a half an hour, or if that person just gets bored. So I think the vetting will be done by way of either somebody's listening, a lot of people are listening, or nobody's listening. If nobody's listening, I would guess to say that the average person would be a little bit frustrated and saying, well, I'm going to do something else. There's nothing more frustrated than put your heart into something and no one's listening. So I think the general public will be the vetters, whether or not you're around for a short time or a long time.
What's next for Russ LeBlanc?
Well, as far as me, I mean, I'm going back to broadcasting as far as doing shows and things of that nature. The only show I love because it's very high energy. I stick some reverb on there. Somebody said to me once, "Oh, it's kind of like listening to American Graffiti." I said, "Well, great, that's what I want." So, if my old body holds out that I can sit in a chair long enough, like I'd like to get back to some of the other markets. I wouldn't mind getting into Boston or something similar because I grew up until I was almost 12 in Boston. We moved to Yarmouth. I used to listen to WMEX. Matter of fact, a number of years ago, I did an open line type thing. I called it a webcast, a number of them, for a few groups I belonged to that was Boston based and school based where I went to school, taught by nuns. And we all had our horror stories and our good stories. So I thought, why don't we do an open line? So I did a number of open lines by way of internet that they would phone me, and it would be just like an open line show on the radio, but it was done by way of internet. And it got some good reaction. I got written up in one of the Boston papers, and I wouldn't mind. To be truthful, I noticed that WMEX is back, nowhere near to where it was. It's been bought by a couple of people, one of which was one of the jocks from WMX's heyday. And it's lowered in power. The transmitter's different. I don't know if you can pick it up in Yarmouth, but it's on the same frequency as it was back then when it was one of the top rockers, 1510. I wouldn't mind getting back on that. That would be kind of neat. As far as anything else, whatever. But, we can only do so much. And then we have to say, well, I can't do it. And there comes a time when everyone has to say that because it's just life. So I'm not full of piss and vinegar as I once was. I mean, I've had my own studio for 20 years. I've done commercials. I had to go downtown to do it in Toronto, and now I don't have to do that. But I've led a very interesting life as far as broadcasting, and it all started at CJLS. But I mean, there was one point in time in my career that I didn't have a day off for 3 months, that I was working doing, and it was kind of cool to be on Good Time Oldies live and being heard on CJLS and also heard on Chum 1050 Chum in Toronto, one of the bigger stations, one of the old rockers, and right across the country. But I went back. There was a time when we went back to visit my parents, and I was doing actually. I took some time off, a couple of weeks, and the person filling in for me was one of the top jocks at one time in Toronto, Tom Rivers. And I could proudly say to someone in Toronto, I had Tom Rivers fill in for me. Yeah, it's true. But it was kind of neat. But I went down, it was the coal shed thing was happening with Phil, and God love him. And he's put in his time and he deserves a rest. And of course, the passing of his wife, she was a great lady. I was down there and I saw someone I knew from badminton. And he came up to me and he said, you know something? And he's not the type of guy to say this. He says, we're really proud of you. And I said, what? He said, yeah, you're a local boy done good. And he was referring to the fact that I was doing this national thing in the gold line and from Toronto. And there was a time when I was on, I counted about 150, 160 stations on a variety of formats. I was doing country as Russ Collins. So when I was doing oldies in Yarmouth as Russ LeBlanc, you could hear me in Bridgewater as Russ Collins, or maybe an adult contemporary station as Rusty Russell or whatever. And I was on all the major markets and the smaller markets. I mean, everybody was carrying it, and finally they came to the conclusion that hey, we can do this ourselves, and that was the beginning of the end. But yeah, to have someone say that to you, it was really made me feel good that somebody noticed, and yeah, I was kind of a utility player. You're not going to see me on any broadcast memorials, big time or Hall of Fames. But I was, I was doing the rock and roll. I was doing at the Talk 640. I was hosting all of their infomercials on the weekends. And what an infomercial is, it's a commercial disguised as a piece of programming. But this infomercial was about financial planning, and we had one of the president of a financial planning company. He and I worked well together. I was kind of like the comedic, kind of like the Adam Carolla and Loveline. And it started out, I believe, as a half hour, went to an hour, then went to 2 hours. Then it became syndicated. An infomercial, I don't think that's ever been done, that an infomercial becomes syndicated, meaning that they had to pay to be on that Toronto station. But the other markets, such as Edmonton or Calgary or Hamilton, they were actually providing airtime to the station or to whomever to get this show on their air. They were paying something, so that was very unique. And then still doing a local show there too. So I was doing talk, and then as a result of doing that, I was the fill-in host for 3 months for Canada's Business Report. That was a 5-minute thing, daily thing. That was about 20 stations, and talking with some pretty higher ups in the financial industry. And I got to talk with Fred Ketchen of Scotia McLeod, who's one of the top dogs there, and he and I became friends, and we were exchanging a little jocularity. So there was humor in it. Anything I do, there's kind of humor in it. I was doing that, and then I was helping a station out in Coburg with their sales. I was all over the place. I was a utility player. I was working for there was a time, because of the different formats, and I had a different name. I think it was in Calgary that I was on competing radio stations on the staff, kind of because we were providing it from Toronto. I was Russ Collins on the country station, and on the rock and roll station, I was Russ LeBlanc. So it didn't take. I didn't change my voice at all, but it was kind of unique. I can honestly say that I've probably done more than the average bear in broadcasting. I don't have the bank account to prove it, but yeah, it was for a while there here in Toronto. It was crazy. It was fun though.
We really appreciate you chatting with us today, Russ. It's really, really cool to hear all the stories and connect the dots with some of the other gentlemen that we've talked to over the years as well.
Well, thank you, Quinn. I've known you for a number of years, and I remember the old days of Viking Cable and Sue in the front office and all that stuff. And I'm sure that has changed dramatically too. So it was nice reminiscing with you.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Russ.
I'm Gary Nickerson.
And I'm Quinn Taggart.
And this has been Outside My Window.